I'm fully prepared with everything I need for the Jay-Z documentary. The moment he sent that legal letter, I knew I had to let the world see who he really is. He and Diddy are cut from the same cloth. He just hides his arrogance and control behind a cleaner image. Our feud has lasted 20 years, and I know better than anyone what he's done in the shadows.
I'm fully prepared, every document cataloged, every interview clipped and cross-referenced, every public statement compared against timelines and contradictions. When that legal letter arrived, it wasn't fear I felt, it was clarity. It was the unmistakable signal that this project had crossed from curiosity into consequence. And in that instant, I understood that this documentary could no longer be treated as entertainment or commentary. It had become something more deliberate, more surgical, a record of patterns of proximity of power. For years, the public narrative has separated Jay-Z and Diddy as though they exist on opposite ends of the cultural spectrum, one loud, flashy, and reckless, the other measured, strategic, refined. But the more I studied their trajectories, the more that contrast began to feel superficial. In my view, they emerged from the same ecosystem, an industry that rewards dominance, protects influence, and thrives on perception management. The difference isn't morality, it's method. Diddy performs power. Jay-Z conceals it behind restraint. Diddy's authority often looks chaotic, Jay-Z's looks curated. Diddy thrives on spectacle, Jay-Z masters optics. Where one overwhelms the room, the other controls it silently. That distinction matters because quiet control is harder to detect and far harder to challenge. Our tension spans 2 decades, 20 years of watching how stories are shaped, how alliances shift when convenient, how loyalty often bends in the direction of self-preservation. This isn't about gossip, it isn't about online noise, it's about recognizing patterns, how certain individuals consistently remain adjacent to controversy yet never directly entangled in it, how influence can exist without fingerprints, how narratives can be adjusted before they solidify. That's why certain moments have never sat comfortably with me. Even seemingly minor gestures, the kind the public dismisses as symbolic or harmless, sometimes carry strategic weight. That funeral bouquet, for instance, on the surface it looked like a routine display of respect. But in an industry where perception is currency, I've learned to question timing, to question coordination, to question who benefits from what the public sees. Maybe it was nothing, maybe it was something. But in a world where optics are engineered, coincidence becomes a luxury few powerful people rely on. And then there's the speed at which control activates when the image is threatened. When Nicki Minaj posted that pink wig video, I reposted it without commentary. It was lighthearted, even absurd, yet the reaction was immediate. Legal pressure followed. That kind of urgency suggests something deeper than annoyance. It suggests a system built to contain vulnerability before it metastasizes. Public figures don't fear jokes. They fear cracks in the myths. In 2015, another narrative formed. Nicki's contributions to building platforms, amplifying momentum, and expanding influence were undeniable. The allegation that $7.9 million in royalties were pocketed remains contested, but its existence contributes to a broader perception, one where proximity to power doesn't always equal protection. It raises uncomfortable questions about leverage, about who truly controls financial narratives behind the scenes. And this pattern repeats. The elevator incident, the exclusive guest lists, the high-profile rooms where influence circulates quietly. Time and time again, Jay-Z's name hovers near major moments without absorbing direct impact. The public image remains polished, untouched, curated. That's not luck. That's architecture. It's the architecture of reputation management, of strategic silence, of knowing when to step forward and when to disappear. Because sometimes the most powerful move isn't dominance, it's invisibility. But invisibility only works when scrutiny is fragmented. And now scrutiny is converging. What's different this time isn't just the allegations surrounding Diddy. It's the scale of exposure, it's the erosion of old protections, it's the fact that digital memory doesn't fade the way traditional headlines once did. Every clip resurfaces, every contradiction is archived, every statement is preserved. Silence in this environment doesn't neutralize controversy. It amplifies it. Because when a figure who has spent decades carefully controlling their narrative chooses not to speak directly, that absence becomes its own statement. Lawyers issue carefully worded responses. Representatives release controlled denials, but the public senses the difference between institutional language and personal accountability. And that's where the tension lives now. This documentary isn't about theatrics. It isn't about sensationalism. It's about asking uncomfortable questions in an era where influence has long operated without meaningful challenge. It's about examining how systems protect their most valuable assets. It's about exploring whether distance from chaos is genuine or engineered. When powerful individuals grow accustomed to insulation, they begin to assume permanence. They assume the narrative can always be redirected, the spotlight shifted, the controversy compartmentalized. They assume the public will tire before accountability arrives. But something has shifted. The culture is less patient, the audience is less distracted. The machinery that once quietly absorbed impact is under stress, and when that machinery falters even slightly, the myth weakens. This isn't about declaring guilt, it's about questioning immunity. It's about asking why certain names consistently remain untouched while others fall. It's about examining whether power simply outmaneuvered scrutiny for decades, and whether that era is ending. Because once even a fragment of darkness is exposed, it cannot be unseen. Once patterns are recognized, they cannot be ignored. Once questions are asked loudly enough, silence no longer suffices. And whether this ends in vindication, revelation, or something in between, one reality remains undeniable. The conversation has moved into the open. And once that happens, control becomes much harder to maintain. In the middle of all this, clips continue to circulate. Jay-Z in private lounges, at elite gatherings, at exclusive events, laughing easily, trading jokes, moving through rooms as if nothing in the world could touch him. The body language reads calm, relaxed, untouchable. It creates the impression of someone insulated from consequence, someone confident that storms eventually pass if you simply stand still and let others absorb the lightning. But public perception has changed. Silence no longer feels strategic, it feels conspicuous. The longer he refrains from addressing the growing discourse directly, the louder that silence echoes. And in the vacuum left behind, speculation multiplies. People begin asking why. Why no personal statement? Why no unscripted interview? Why allow lawyers and intermediaries to speak while he remains distant? As the broader investigation surrounding Diddy intensified, the narrative expanded. Online commentators began suggesting that Jay-Z is in survival mode, quietly recalibrating alliances and minimizing visibility. There has been talk of private correspondence between him and Diddy becoming relevant, of old communications being scrutinized in ways they never were before. More significantly, long-standing accusations, some previously dismissed, others barely acknowledged, have resurfaced, tying his name to alleged misconduct alongside Diddy over many years. The language being used is severe, the allegations are serious, and regardless of where the truth ultimately lands, the scale of public discussion itself marks a shift. For decades, certain figures seemed insulated by prestige, partnerships, and proximity to power. Now the protection appears thinner, the scrutiny feels broader, the threshold for silence feels lower. 50 Cent has repeatedly emphasized that he was never part of Diddy's inner circle. He has described feeling uneasy about certain environments and invitations, framing that distance as the reason he feels comfortable speaking now. According to him, he learned about the allegations through media reports like everyone else. What stood out in his tone wasn't shock, it was inevitability, as if he had long suspected that something beneath the surface would eventually surface. Jaguar Wright has gone further than most. She has alleged that Jay-Z engaged in behavior she considers worse than what Diddy has been accused of in high-profile cases. She claims personal harm, stating that she has scars to prove it, and she alleges that at one point he attacked her and that it was recorded. She has also suggested that his current distance from Diddy is strategic, that he is separating himself before the fallout expands. These remain allegations, and they have not been proven in court. However, their repetition across platforms has amplified public curiosity. People are revisiting older interviews, old clips, long-buried rumors, reinterpreting them through a new lens shaped by current events. As scrutiny surrounding Diddy deepened, Jay-Z's silence became more noticeable. Some observers believe his team anticipated that his name might appear in litigation and began preemptive damage control. Others argue that even in the absence of formal charges, reputational damage unfolds in real time, especially in the age of social media where narratives spread faster than official responses. More troubling are claims from one accuser who alleges she withdrew her lawsuit due to harassment and fear. She maintains that she stands by her allegations but felt intimidated. In newly filed legal documents, she asserts that two individuals approached her outside her home, identifying themselves as investigators connected to one of Jay-Z's attorneys. According to her account, they attempted to persuade her to sign an affidavit stating that her claims were false. She refused. She further alleges that the investigators questioned whether her own attorney had recruited her and offered financial incentives to pursue false accusations, claims she denies. The encounter, she says, left her shaken, particularly because her identity had remained anonymous in legal filings and media coverage. She questioned how they located her. She also alleges that her parents were approached and asked similar questions. In her filings, she states that fear of being publicly identified and subjected to backlash played a central role in her decision to drop the case. These are serious assertions. They have been presented in legal documents, but they remain part of an ongoing and contested process. What is undeniable is that the conversation has expanded beyond isolated rumors. It now exists in court filings, in mainstream headlines, and across digital platforms where collective memory does not fade. And that is what changes the stakes. Not just the accusations themselves, but the fact that the era of quiet containment appears to be over. Industry insiders keep circling back to the same sobering reality. One serious criminal inquiry can dismantle an empire overnight, especially for anyone deeply intertwined with Diddy's world. Careers built over decades can fracture in weeks. Partnerships can evaporate, endorsements disappear, allies grow distant. That's why many believe this documentary carries weight far beyond one individual. It isn't simply about personal accusations. It's about networks, about who knew what when they knew it, and how influence functioned behind closed doors. It's about understanding how reputations were protected, how narratives were managed, and how certain figures seemed insulated for years while others faced consequences. Some commentators have even speculated that if Diddy were to cooperate with authorities in an effort to mitigate his own legal exposure, additional names could surface in the process. In that hypothetical scenario, long-standing associations would inevitably be re-examined. Jay-Z's name appears in those conversations not because of formal charges, but because of proximity, because of decades spent operating within overlapping circles of influence. The mere possibility of expanded scrutiny has intensified public attention. This is also why the story involving Kathy White keeps re-entering the discourse. References from 50 Cent and others suggest that should Diddy decide to speak openly, he should address what he allegedly knows about that case. The claims circulating online are dramatic and often speculative. They remain unproven, yet their persistence underscores a deeper sentiment among segments of the public, a belief that powerful networks have shielded certain individuals for too long. Whether accurate or exaggerated, these narratives spread because many people feel that accountability in the industry has historically been uneven. With the documentary now formally released, the conversation has shifted from retrospective analysis to anticipation. What happens next? Each new headline, each new interview pulls attention toward the silent figures, those who have not yet spoken directly. Jay-Z sits at the center of that pressure largely because of his long-standing proximity to Diddy and the perception that their relationship extended beyond casual association. When Jay-Z's attorney stated that the two men were never truly close, Gene Deal publicly challenged that framing. He argued that their shared appearances, on-stage interactions, and public familiarity contradicted the idea of mere distance. According to Gene, Diddy often showed visible support at Jay-Z's events, while the reciprocity seemed less consistent. In his view, the optics suggested something more layered than a distant acquaintance. Dame Dash approached the situation from a different angle. Rather than focusing exclusively on the allegations, he commented on the unusual sight of Jay-Z facing widespread scrutiny from mainstream outlets. For years, Jay-Z appeared almost culturally untouchable, respected across demographics, shielded by prestige. Dame suggested that silence may not serve him well under these circumstances, and argued that if Jay-Z is innocent, addressing questions directly could be more effective than relying solely on legal representatives. He also criticized the language used to distance himself from Diddy, suggesting that denying any meaningful relationship might provoke skepticism rather than comment. Tony Yeo offered yet another perspective, linking the ongoing commentary from 50 Cent to long-standing competitive dynamics within hip-hop. Rivalries in the genre are rarely purely artistic. They intertwine with loyalty, business interests, and legacy. Yeo contrasted 50's public accessibility with Jay-Z's more elevated, corporate-facing persona. He revisited claims that 50 was initially excluded from the Super Bowl halftime performance lineup and that Eminem allegedly insisted on his inclusion. To Yeo, that episode symbolized enduring tension at the highest levels of the industry, where ego, competition, and influence intersect. As the discussion widened, it evolved beyond individual disputes and into a critique of the industry itself. Some observers argue that hip-hop, once rooted in raw storytelling and cultural resistance, has been absorbed into a larger profit-driven machine. In that system, power can become self-protective, alliances transactional, and accountability uneven. Jaguar Wright has claimed that Jay-Z has strategically positioned others to absorb fallout, though these remain her allegations and opinions rather than established fact. Still, such claims contribute to the broader narrative that influence operates in ways the public rarely sees. Roger Bonds, Diddy's former chief of security, added nuance by describing the relationship as more imbalanced than intimate. He stated that while he witnessed interactions between the two, he never perceived a deep loyalty. In his assessment, Diddy appeared more invested in the connection than Jay-Z did. Bonds pointed to disparities in event attendance and public gestures as subtle indicators of that imbalance. He characterized their dynamic as rooted more in shared status, overlapping business spaces, and mutual advantage than in genuine personal closeness. And that is where the conversation currently rests, on questions rather than conclusions. If Jay-Z and Diddy were never as closely aligned as public perception suggested, why do their names so frequently intersect in these narratives? If the foundation of their association contained fractures all along, are those cracks widening under the weight of scrutiny? And if the current wave of attention represents a turning point rather than a passing storm, who else might find themselves drawn into the spotlight? For now, there are more questions than answers. What remains clear is that the era of unquestioned insulation appears to be shifting. Whether that shift leads to vindication, accountability, or simply another recalibrated narrative will depend on what surfaces next and on who chooses to speak when silence is no longer sustainable.